Hello, hello. Welcome to the Linen Suit and Plastic Tie podcast. This is the podcast where we work to dissect, analyze, investigate, explore the amazing, the epic, the awe-inspiring, the cool, the impressive, the inspiring power of storytelling and learn how to harness that power in your everyday lives. I'm Gorv.
And I'm Kevin, and that was inspiring twice, so yes, it is doubly inspiring.
Actually, the first time was awe-inspiring, and the second time was just generic inspiring, which means different things. So, one inspires awe, and one just generally inspires. Anyways, I was watching this masterclass the other day with a professor from Northwestern, and she was talking about how one way to de-stress after a long day is to sit and watch an hour-long narrative form of storytelling, because we have been using TikTok and YouTube Shorts and these formats so much, it's actually causing more anxiety for when you kind of sit on a couch and rot. And it's just fascinating because I said this to you, Kev, the other day. We've gotten to a point in society where we're now being told that one of the ways we can de-stress and deconnect is to sit and watch a full narrative hour-long television show. Like, it's no longer turn off all technology, go outside. I'm sure that's better. But she's like, I know you feel like relaxing is sitting on your couch and scrolling through TikTok. It's not. Watch a full narrative form. We're now at a point where people are like, well, you know what, for your own mental health, watch an hour of Sopranos.
Yeah, it's a pretty funny narrative that the best way to unwind from being distracted is paying attention. A little counterintuitive.
The best relaxation thing you can do for yourself is to focus on something. Focus on something you enjoy, though. Focus is not the enemy of relaxation. If you are mindlessly scrolling on your couch and you're not feeling more relaxed, odds are it's because you're not actually focusing on something. So it's better to put down the phone and turn on the television show and watch an hour-long narrative, because you can focus in on that and disconnect while focusing on something. The disconnecting while jumping from thing to thing, that's where your mind gets more exhausted.
Yeah, and we actually talk quite a bit about an aspect of paying attention this season on the show when we kicked off our season premiere with Professor Allison Wood Brooks about talking. We talked about how the biggest enemy to having a good conversation is distraction, is not paying attention. And this is something that happens to us as well, is we're not actively listening and paying attention to what the other person is saying. You know, you're not going to drive the conversation well. We're not going to be good hosts. We're not going to be able to know how to ask the next best follow-up question to what our guest is just talking about.
And I think I've seen it with myself sometimes, where I'll be talking to someone, and if they don't get to their point in a minute, I'm like, kind of like, okay, come on. Like, or I'm like, if this minute didn't serve me or help this conversation, sometimes my brain can sometimes be like, okay, what are we doing? Because with TikTok, as we get into social media, as we build different TikToks, you watch all these videos on, okay, this is where you put the hook, this is where you engage, and this is where you tell a story. Bam, one TikTok, 1 minute, you did one TikTok, 1 minute, you just did this whole journey, right? And it's a psychological trick to get people liking content, moving through, seeing a bunch of different stuff. But at the same time, in life, things take longer than a minute. And if we shorten our attention spans too much, our conversations are going to become very difficult. And so I think this is the thing with communication, and this is the thing with, we're constantly talking about consume a diversity of storytelling. If you want to tell any stories to a Gen Z audience, odds are on TikTok, and you have to understand that platform to connect with them. But also take the time to consume different forms of storytelling. I love going to the movies, turning off the phone, experiencing a cinema. I have to remind myself, having my phone off and watching a full movie is healthy. Going to kickbox for an hour is healthy. The stories you consume matter, but also the ways you consume storytelling matters. Just diversify your palette and try different things, and you can find ways to live a healthier life, expand your attention span, and overall connect with audiences differently.
And to explore how to better pay attention and engage in a conversation better, this week we are talking with yet another expert in how to talk. We are talking with Professor Matt Abrams from Stanford Graduate School of Business. He teaches a very successful MBA class about how to talk better, because that is obviously a focus of business school students, but obviously the world at large, because we as humans need to talk or communicate. And Matt hosts a podcast called Think Fast, Talk Smart, which further explores this topic. Also, a book that stems from his teachings, Think Faster, Talk Smarter. So we're going to learn about how do you get yourself to pay attention better, to talk better? How does doing the wrong thing actually helps you communicate better? What does martial arts have to do in you becoming a better communicator? So without further ado, let's get into it.
Hello, how do you do? Sit down, gather around. We've got stories about stories that'll mix you a drink of wonder and mystique. Cause life can be dry, better dressed for the times with the linen suit and plastic tie. Linen suit and plastic tie. Now here's Gaurav and Kevin.
To kick us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What is your story?
Yeah, so I'm somebody who is passionate about communication. As long as I can remember, it's been something that's really been interesting to me and a significant part of my life. My father was a lawyer where clear, concise communication was really important. My mother was an elementary school teacher, later an English as a second language teacher, where creativity, engagement, really empowering people through language and communication. And it's something that I just soaked into me. I'm somebody who's really passionate about it. Went to university, studied psychology, discovered communication as a field, got a graduate degree in that. Worked in high tech for about a decade and saw the impact of effective communication and not effective communication and storytelling, and then had the opportunity to come back to my true passion, which is teaching. And I've been teaching ever since. And today I teach at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. I've been there 15 years. I teach strategic communication. And a large part of what we do is help our students feel more comfortable and confident telling their own stories and helping craft the stories of the businesses that they end up working for and running.
I love that for this season, we're spending so much time exploring communications, of course, and the kind of study into language itself. English is my second language. So English as second language learning is a big part of my life. Are there anything from observing how your mother went about her work in ESL teaching that really, influenced you, that you can identify whether explicitly or implicitly?
Yeah, so I am very interested in non-native speaking. Many of the people who listen to my podcast, Think Fast, Talk Smart, are non-native speakers. I've had several guests on who are experts in that. And to synthesize what I observed my mother teach and what I've heard from these experts, it really boils down to just a few things. One, don't try to be a native speaker. The pressure we put on ourselves to speak that other language as if we were native actually works against us, and it's a cognitive load issue. The goal of all communication, this doesn't matter if you're speaking in your native tongue or one that's newer to you, is to connect with your audience, to get information across. The definition of communication, its origins, is the word to make common. So communication is all about making common and connecting. So rather than focusing on saying it exactly right or the way a native speaker would say it, focus on just getting the point across, which means you might repeat yourself. You might say it once and then tell a story, or say it once and use an analogy. And I saw my mother, who was expert at demonstrating this, but also encouraged her students to do it. And the thing that it did is it takes the pressure off. So the number one rule is just focus on connecting rather than sounding like a native speaker. And then the next thing is observation. We learn a lot about our communication by observing others. If you want to be a good writer, read a lot of people who've written well. If you want to become a good speaker, observe. And it's not just what people say or when they say it, but it's also the context. One of the hardest things to learn, as you well know, in any language is the contextual meaning of words. For example, if you're going to the doctor and the doctor says, "How are you doing?" that means one thing. If you're at a party or at a bar and somebody says, "How are you doing?" that could mean something very different. So the contextual learnings are hard, and you get that through observation.
Something you talk about a lot in your podcast, in your book, in your teachings is this idea of perfection, right? This idea that we are kind of chasing perfection in communication and in
Yes.
storytelling, and that's causing all this undue pressure. You obviously work in a very ambitious, strong, driving community. How do you tackle perfectionism in communication? How do you get people to break down that built-up story in their head about everything has to be perfect?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So I like to say connection over perfection. So one of the things that drives us is we want to get our message across. When you communicate, you have something to get across. And we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to say it the right way, as if there is a right way. I mean, the reality is I've been studying this and doing this work for decades. There is no one right way to communicate. There are better ways and worse ways. And when we put that pressure on ourselves to do it right, whatever that is, we get in our own way. It's a cognitive bandwidth issue. You know, on your laptop, your tablet, your phone, if you have multiple apps or windows open, each one of those individual apps or windows is performing less well because the others are open. It's taking some of that CPU bandwidth. Your brain's the same way. If I have a script that I've memorized, or there's a certain way I want to say this part, I am judging as I'm saying it, so I have less bandwidth available. So it's important, rather, again, to say it's about just getting the point across. I just want to get the information so the other person learns it. And when I do that, that's success. Success is not saying it exactly the right way. Now, there are circumstances, I realize this, where you do have to say things exactly right. If you're doing something in a negotiation, if you're in the legal world, yes, there is a way that it must be said. But that's not most of our communication. That's a strict subset of our communication. If you'll allow me, I want to share a story about how much we judge ourselves and get in our own way. I do this game. I borrowed it from improvisation. I co-teach a class at Stanford's continuing studies with a gentleman who's an expert improviser and a screenwriter who teaches screenwriting at Stanford. His name's Adam Tobin, and Adam taught me this game. It's called Shout the Wrong Name. And any of your listeners, viewers, can play this game. For 15 seconds, wherever you are, just point at different objects in the room and just call them something different. So if I point at the ceiling, I might call it a car. I might call it a lemon. It does not matter. Just call it something other than what it is. And I do this in one of the first activities in my class I teach because the students come to realize just how much they judge themselves. I had a student once playing this game. The only rule is point to something and call it something it is not. And I had a student who was pointing at a chair and nothing was coming out of his mouth. And I went to him, I said, "What's going on?" He said, "I'm not being wrong enough." And I thought that was weird because I never assigned a rubric of wrongness and rightness. I just say, call it the wrong name. And I said, "Tell me more." And he said, "Well, I was going to call the chair a cat, but a cat has 4 legs and a chair has 4 legs. I'm not being wrong enough." And then he said, "Sometimes cats sit on chairs. I'm not being wrong enough." And I tell this story because it gives an example of how much we judge and evaluate and strive to do it right. He was doing this so much, he couldn't do it at all. He completely failed at the activity because he was trying to do it right. So the whole idea here is to dial down the volume on that perfectionism and really just try to connect and do what's needed in the moment. I'm certainly not saying don't judge what you say. We need to think about it. But most of us are running around with that setting at an 11 when we could bring it down to a 3 or 4 and survive just fine. Sorry, you got me on a topic I'm really passionate about. So I went on a little more than probably I should have.
No. I mean, we love a tangent here.
Exactly.
No. I think Kevin and I are huge perfectionists, right? But two people who, that was one of our biggest struggles with starting this show is because we knew it was going to be bad, but we just had to start. And so this is something we love talking about because it's a story, right? Perfectionism is just a story we're telling ourselves that it needs to be a way to be quote unquote successful. So we love talking about.
And I think with that, though, it's pretty natural when you're trying to achieve that doing the wrong thing kind of
that
goal.
Yeah.
There's a certain level of anxiety that comes with that, obviously, because, we always at least want to try to do things right. How do we navigate that anxiety then? Is that necessarily a bad thing? How do we leverage that?
Yeah, so anxiety is normal and natural. Those of us who study it, and I've done research in this, and many others do, we believe it's part of being human. It is normal and natural to be nervous when you speak in high stakes situations. In fact, 85% of people report being nervous in those circumstances. And quite frankly, I think the other 15% are lying. I think we could create a situation that makes them nervous too. We see this anxiety across cultures, so it's not just here in the US. And we see it develop at a pretty particular time in children's development into young adults. Around the tween years is when anxiety around speaking in front of others really amps up in most people. So this leads us to think it's just innate. It's part of being human. But that doesn't mean we can't learn to manage it. You can manage it, and you should, because it helps you and it helps your audience. When you see a nervous speaker, let me ask you this. How do you both feel when you see somebody nervous speaking? How's that make you feel?
I think as someone who struggles with anxiety in immense ways, I think there's a lot of empathy for me. I feel nervous for the person, and
Same
I'm
here.
just like sitting there like, I really want it to go well for that person.
Yeah, absolutely. So you feel that secondhand anxiety,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And in essence, I love that you're empathetic, which is great, and many of us are. But what's happening is you're being distracted by that person's nervousness. And if the goal is to connect and to actually land a message, me making you nervous as my audience is not helping me. So we need to learn to manage it, not just to help ourselves, because it doesn't feel good to be nervous, and it can be distracting to ourselves, but it's also distracting to the other person. So there are things we can do to manage our anxiety, and it's a two-pronged approach. You have to manage symptoms and sources. Symptoms are the things that we physiologically feel: rapid heart rate, shaky hands, dry mouth, sweaty brow. And then there's sources, things that initiate and exacerbate. We've talked about one of the sources already, perfectionism. There are other sources as well, like the goal you have. Many of the people I coach are nervous because of the goal they have when they communicate. My students want to get a good grade. The salesperson wants to close the deal. You might want to get your project supported. And what makes you nervous is the potential of not achieving it. And there's some things we can do to manage against that source of your fear. So if the goal is causing you to be nervous, a goal is nothing more than a future state. So getting yourself present oriented by definition should short circuit the long-term goal. So being present helps. So how do you get present? Do something physical, walk around the building, listen to a song or a playlist like athletes do before they perform. Start at 100 and count backwards by a challenging number like 17s. That gets you present oriented. I say tongue twisters before I start speaking. That gets me present oriented. You can't say a tongue twister right, not be in the present moment, and it warms up your voice. Before we logged on today, I said a tongue twister a few times just to warm up. So things you can do to manage sources, and there are many things you can do to manage symptoms. The single best one is to do deep breathing and focus on the exhalation. All of the magic happens on the exhale. So the rule of thumb, or I like to joke the rule of long, is you want your exhale to be twice as long as your inhale. If you do those things, you can begin to feel more confident.
I love that. Kevin knows this, and I think it's made it into the show a couple times, but I do a version of Sharpay's vocal exercises from High School Musical before we start every one of these shows. Wrong, though. I'm not actually doing the vocal exercise. I'm just doing like the sounds. But it's just a way to like shock your system and get you present. That's one thing I love about your work as well is I take mindfulness very seriously, and I take how I deal with my anxiety very seriously. And you talk about it as such key tools in communication.
Mindfulness is really important. Being present is important. If communication is about connection, the only way to connect is to be present while you're having that communication. And many of us live in our heads, myself included, right? Thinking about, did I say the right thing? What could I say better? What am I going to have for lunch? What's next? All of this lives in our head and gets in the way of us effectively communicating. And there's actually some really interesting mindfulness-based anxiety management techniques. A great one is this. When you begin to feel nervous, say to yourself, this is me feeling nervous. And what this does is it builds distance between you and your experience of nervousness. You are separating yourself from that. And when you do that, you give yourself space. You can say, this is me feeling nervous. It makes sense I'm nervous. I'm on a podcast with some really impressive people. Others I don't know are going to hear this. Anybody in this circumstance is likely to feel nervous. And that space I gave myself by saying, this is me feeling nervous, allows me then to have that rationalization and perhaps to do something about it. So mindfulness is a wonderful practice for life in general, but especially around helping manage anxiety and have deeper connections.
Yeah, I love these very actionable approaches you're talking about. And I think it ties so much to what we talk about on this show as well about internal storytelling. When you're feeling the anxiety, the stress, these are all very simple things you can do to reframe the narrative of your experience right now to be like, oh, this is normal, or I can get myself engaged and think about this experience in a different light that is going to de-stress myself and keep myself more present. So that's why
I want to jump on that really quickly. The framing that we have of these events, especially around anxiety, really, really important. A friend and colleague at what I like to say is the Stanford of the East. She's at Harvard's Business School. Alison Woods Brooks, phenomenal person, great research. A while back, she did research that said, if you think about it, the physiological experience we have of anxiety is very similar, if not identical, to the physiological experience we have of excitement. So if you can reframe your anxiety as excitement and say to yourself, hey, what I'm feeling now is the excitement I have to get this information out, totally changes, one, how you feel. You get more into it versus, being negative about what's happening to you. And people who redo this reframing end up communicating better with more energy. People remember it more. People find the experience more positive. So you're absolutely right. The stories we tell ourselves, the approaches we take fundamentally impact not just how we feel, but how those who hear us and learn from us feel as well.
Yeah, we love Alison on the show. We kicked off season 5 with her.
Great.
Amazing.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
Amazing professor, amazing person. But I love that. I love this idea of framing and the stories we tell ourselves and how we approach a situation. It really affects our entire mindset. Like, this is a big part of the show, is that storytelling is how we view the world. It's not just what we say to the world, it's how we connect with it. And it's the same thing with communication. When you start this class and you teach so many students and get to touch so many different lives, what do you think is the biggest unlock? Like, I'm sure people come in thinking, oh, I'm going to be able to give a better TED Talk. What do you think do they actually get out of becoming better communicators?
Ironically, when they come to the class to become better communicators, they actually learn about themselves more. I think the two things that surprise my students the most is the self-learning that they come away with. They think it's all about messaging and what I'm going to broadcast to the world, but they actually end up learning a lot about themselves and how their internal communication works. And people come away with an understanding of how critical listening is in communication. You take a communication class, especially a strategic communication class, and you think it's all going to be about that broadcast and what's coming out. But in fact, what makes you an effective strategic communicator is your ability to listen and target your messages appropriately. And that's really where the value can come.
Can you touch upon a little bit more? What's the difference between strategic communication and communication?
What's the difference between strategic communication and communication in general?
Yeah.
So at some level, all communication is strategic. When I refer to strategic communication, I mean it is specific goal-based communication that's trying to have impact in terms of changing attitudes, behaviors, outcomes for people. So at the highest level, any communication is strategic because there's something motivating it. But the class is very focused on purposeful, goal-driven communication in service of your own goals or the goals of some organization, be it a company or a group. And that's the distinction we make. So under the rubric of strategic communication that I teach, it's things like branding, crisis management. How do we assimilate multiple organizations during a merger or acquisition? That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about.
How do we get better at listening? You brought up this concept. It's obviously very important. We talked about this with Alison as well. And, for us, at least for me, sometimes I get so bogged down or just tunnel vision on what I want to say next that I just stop listening.
Yeah, there are a whole bunch of barriers to listening. And I encourage everybody listening to this to listen to what Alison said, because she's phenomenal and I'm sure had lots of insights. I love when she talks about what she calls long-term listening. So after this conversation we have today, if I see you again bringing up something that we talked about today later, is a great way to demonstrate I listened, I care, and I want to connect. But the reality is there are lots of barriers to listening. And I have to share with you, my wife thinks I'm a fraud when I teach listening because she thinks I could do a lot better at it. And I agree, we all can. So let me talk about the barriers first, and then I'll share with you some ways to get better. There are three primary barriers to listening in the way I look at the world. They all start with the letter P: physical, physiological, and psychological. A physical barrier is it's just loud. The older I get, the louder places become. When I go to a restaurant or some kind of public space, it's loud and it's hard for me to hear. So that's one barrier. Two is physiological. When we're tired, we're hungry, we're nervous, we're hangry, that gets in the way of listening. The physiological needs we have in that moment can interfere with our ability to really listen. And then finally, our psychological. And you alluded to those when you were asking the question. It's the judging, the evaluating, the rehearsing. That gets in the way of us truly listening. So because of those barriers, we listen primarily for just the top line. We just get some gist of what somebody is saying, and then we fixate, or that's all we move forward from. A better way to learn to listen is to listen as if you had to paraphrase. So when you listen to paraphrase, that is to take what the person said and repeat it in your own words. And I'm not saying you actually have to utter the paraphrase, although that can help. And Allison's research shows that when you actually paraphrase, you demonstrate connection and listening and build trust in a way that you don't if you just nod your head and go, uh-huh, uh-huh. But if you listen to paraphrase, listen for that bottom line, it causes you to focus, to be more present, and to be more deeply connected to the person that you're speaking to. So if you really want to practice becoming a better listener, practice paraphrasing. So I encourage my students, after they leave class, after they read something I assign them to read, after they listen to your podcast, my podcast, I ask them, take 10 seconds and think about what's the bottom line of what I just heard. And if you do that kind of drill over and over, you train your brain to listen differently than what most of us do. And in so doing, we become better at communication.
With YouTube becoming the norm, TikTok, the short form content, it's kind of like we're skipping to the bottom line, which is making longer term content harder to consume because we're getting trained to just paraphrase it for us, right? Even with tools like AI. So I think it's so important that we do these practices so that we are still engaged in longer form storytelling. I think that's such an important tool.
Yeah, and some of us who teach, narrative storytelling, we worry about some of the things that you're talking about. I mean, is this all becoming just a quick dopamine hit, and people are becoming trained that a story is a quick hit? And I think there's a place for that, but there's also a place for a deeper, more slow building narrative. I don't think it's either or. I think it's a blend of both, but certainly we are seeing an onslaught of the shorter form storytelling.
Through your very long tenure of teaching communication.
Did you just call me old? I'm kidding. Yes.
I mostly speak to your decade experience in teaching, but something I'm very curious about is throughout your tenure of teaching communications to students. Have you seen that general trend of technology, social media in the world affect the student body, your audience that you're teaching to over time?
100%. Absolutely. Technology has had a tremendous impact on communication. And I don't think it's necessarily bad. Just the last 15 years at Stanford's Business School, and I taught communication long before that in many other places. But the advent of technology changed things fundamentally. I mean, I remember when email started and how that changed things. Certainly texting and SMS changed the way that we communicated. Emojis changed the way we communicated and how people respond. The pandemic made virtual communication, what we're doing right now, a mainstay. And now AI and short form video. So yes, it's a constant evolution, and that's good. Communication needs to evolve to meet the times. What we all have to do is become multilingual, though. We have to be able to understand the different tools, and we have to understand that different people have different perspectives. I do some consulting, and I go into organizations where we have multi-generations within an organization, and people who are my age or older are so frustrated at the new hires who are much younger, and they just go around, pick up the phone and call me. Don't send me 3 texts on it or send it on Slack. Call me, right? And the younger kids are like, it's a waste of time. I got to, connect with this person. I got to talk. I just want the answer, So we have to become multilingual in the technology, but also have an appreciation for the people and what they're comfortable with. So yes, the answer is absolutely. I've seen a change in my students. It is not necessarily a bad change. It's one we have to adjust and adapt to. I will tell you the big thing that's changed over all my years of teaching, attention span, for sure. I am finding that I need to change things up in my classes much more frequently than I used to, say a decade ago. And again, I'm not saying necessarily that's a bad thing. I think I am a better teacher because I have to think this way, but it is definitely a dramatic difference.
It's so important. I know there's that common joke that our generation hates talking on the phone, right? We're all afraid of it.
Oh, yeah.
It gives us too much anxiety.
Yeah, I did an interview with a Korean podcaster. My recent book was translated into Korean. And she told me in Korea at the college level, they teach a class on how to make phone calls because the students didn't know how to do it. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, maybe we need that in the States too, to be honest. But it's such a interesting lens to look at it. This how we are changing how we communicate. We are changing the platforms. How do we still have deep conversations when so much is text-based or even Snapchat-based?
Yeah, it's a purposeful act. We have to remind ourselves that as human beings, we are designed to connect. There are people who argue that we developed the ability to communicate as a way of building empathy or showing empathy, that communication is nothing more than a tool for expressed empathy. And for our species, empathy is really important. And when you think about that, that dramatically changes the way you approach your communication. If you think about the way I really connect, demonstrate caring, learn from others is through communication. It's just to remind yourself that the number of friends you have on social media or the number of followers you have, that can feel really good, but that's not a connection in the way that human beings were designed to connect. I'm often asked, what are my thoughts about AI and communication? And I have lots of thoughts. I don't have one thought. But one thing I am fairly confident in is this connection that I'm talking about, this empathy. That's going to be really, really hard to be replicated through AI. A lot of other things AI can do, I think, are amazing and will be very helpful to communication, some probably detrimental. But this fundamental ability to connect in a way that humans can and should is something that's unique to communication. And we just have to remind ourselves of that.
Yeah. You teach and communicate through so many different mediums now, not only from your lecturing, but also you've given talks and you have a podcast and, of course, written your book as well. Do you think those communicating and engaging through those different platforms made you a better storyteller or communicator?
Thank you for that question. I certainly have multi-channels of communication out there, and I'm fundamentally driven to help people hone and develop their communication skills, as I am trying to do. And so having a multi-channel approach, be it the podcast, the books, the teaching, the coaching, all of that is in service of that goal. A fundamental truism of communication, and it is the number one bit of advice that we have heard across all 200 episodes of Think Fast, Talk Smart, my podcast, is that you have to take your audience into account. It's not about what you want to say, it's about what your audience needs to hear. And I try to live that through the different channels I use to communicate. So a short form video could have the very same message that one of my long lectures has, but the way it's framed, the way it's delivered, the emphasis on certain things, visual, verbal, whatever, need to be taken into account. So it is critical in any communication that we think about what the audience needs and what's important to them and how the channel through which you're communicating will help achieve that goal. So every time I communicate, I think about it. So when we got together and I thought, okay, is this a video podcast? Is this just an audio podcast? All of that is impacting what I choose to say and how I choose to say it, as it should for everybody. The message and the audience are critical.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's where storytelling really comes into play, right? How do we tailor something to the audience? And I know on your show, you've talked to a lot of really interesting storytellers. You did this series on non-traditional storytellers. You reached out to some Hollywood people. What are some of the biggest like storytelling lessons you try to apply in your work, in your teaching, in your podcast?
Thank you for that. I see my job, as you are doing a great job of, as being a translator. It's really to take the ideas of people who are very knowledgeable, much more knowledgeable than I, and translate them, not word for word, but into how can you take this knowledge and apply it. And if that's my goal, then I have to listen really well. I have to really focus on what's being said and think about how can that be related in a way that's meaningful. So sometimes I'll talk with a very astute, deep academic whose ideas are amazing, but what does it mean? How do we apply it? So I try to come up with a recipe or some suggestions. In other cases, something somebody says might have a direct application, and I try to extend it perhaps to other situations. So I was talking to somebody about negotiation, but the concept applied to conflict management and persuasion. So I see myself first and foremost as a translator. And then in the storytelling I use, I really try to be engaging. I believe attention is the most precious commodity we have in the world today. And I feel part of my job is to help people engage. And to me, engagement is sustained attention. So I can get your attention pretty quickly, but can I keep it? Mm-hmm. So as I tell my stories, I try to engage. And there's several techniques I try to use, and I think everybody can benefit from. Physical techniques, anything that gets people doing something, where the body goes, the brain follows. So when I speak, I might take a poll, for example. I might ask people to turn to each other. I might ask them to watch something. All of that gets people focused and engaged. I might ask questions or use analogies. That's another way. That's a cognitive engagement technique. I might use language. I love what I call time traveling language. Rather than telling you something, I could say, picture this. What if we could? Imagine what it would be like if. That language gets people seeing it in their mind's eye. So when I tell stories, I see myself as a translator, and I try to be engaging so people are more likely to remember what I say. That's my goal.
Second to last question. How does communication translate to martial arts or vice versa? I know that's a huge part of what you do as well. It's on your website, on your profile. Love to hear more about it.
So I have been doing martial arts for longer than either of you have been around, decades now. And it's a true passion of mine. If you think about it, the martial arts are more than what you see in an MMA fight or some Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee movie, although I find that fascinating. It's really about a way of being. It's about being present. It's about paying attention to the other person, seeing what's needed in the moment. It's a lot of the same skills. And the life lessons that I struggle with outside of the karate mat play out when I'm inside the dojo, the studio, learning. So to me, at a higher level, it's all the same thing. You can think about a fight. You can think about working these skills as a form of communication, right? People are signaling certain things by what they do with their body or their approach, just like we do in communication. So to me, I really see the higher order principles. Taking my class at Stanford and taking a class from me in the karate studio, we're really talking about the same principles, but how they play out are very different. Now, I will tell you this, the lessons you learn in the karate studio have direct impact. When you make a mistake, you feel it. You know, I might say something wrong and the repercussions might not happen for a few weeks at work, but in the karate studio, I end up putting ice on the wrong choice. So to me, it's one and the same thing. And the martial arts have always given me a refuge. I think everybody needs to have some kind of physical activity that we do to get us out of our head. Could be walking in the park, playing a musical instrument, whatever. But I think having some physical outlet is just healthy. And the martial arts have been one for me.
Matt, we have learned so many great stories and profound insights from you today. For our final closing question, we call it the suspenders. This is where we ask you just a random fun question. You can give us any answer you feel like. Question of the day is, what is the best piece of advice that you have never received?
Oh, I like it. The best piece of advice I have never received. I'm going to think about this for a second. So, I've never been told to talk more. And I think there is value in exploring concepts in different ways. And I try to be very precise in my communication, although your listeners to this might say he rambles all over the place, but nobody's ever said to me, say more. And I think that's, for many people, that's useful advice. And in fact, one of the great ways to get to connect to somebody is to simply say, tell me more. And nobody has ever said that to me.
Absolutely love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was an amazing conversation.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Keep up the good work. You're doing a valuable service to people.
Welcome back to Top Hat. This is the part of the episode where we dissect and analyze the amazing storytelling lessons that we got from this week's expert storyteller. And this week we had the amazing, popular, impactful, and very impressive Stanford Business School professor Matt Abrams. You know, Kevin, one of the things Matt talked about that really dinged with me is the conversation between how perfectionism and anxiety manifests in communication. You know, you and I are both, I don't even want to call us recovering perfectionists because we're not recovering that well. Like we just got back from a wedding this weekend, and the first thing I thought when we got back was, did we do it perfectly? You can't attend a wedding perfectly. That doesn't make any sense.
Until we find the perfect way to attend a wedding.
Until we find it.
Yeah, and then we ruminate over how we didn't meet that standard, but continue.
Exactly. And this happens with communication. And Matt talks about how anxiety is necessary. It can be powerful even. But the most important thing you can do in conversation, in storytelling, the stories we tell each other, the stories we tell ourselves, is address perfectionism and anxiety and understand what they are and take a second to be present and mindful of them. And this is where mindfulness comes in, and just shake it out and understand, one, everyone feels it. It's actually super universal. And two, the best thing you can do is just find some ways to kind of shake it out and be present in the moment and understand everyone feels anxious. Everyone struggles with perfectionism in some way. And the best thing you can do is just do it and just try your best.
Yeah, and Matt and his peers actually instruct students to play this game where they intentionally say the wrong thing so they can stretch themselves in that other direction to combat this feeling of chasing perfectionism, doing the perfect thing or saying the right thing, because it does help us to realize in the vast majority of circumstances, it doesn't matter that much. Even if you slip up, say the non-accurate thing, most of the time it doesn't matter. And that should be how we carry with our day-to-day conversations. And another thing that was really insightful was his observations of different generations of students, what is unique about their characteristics as listeners to his lectures. He talks about, obviously, with the rise of social media, short form content consumption, these later generations of students have more of a shorter attention span, which obviously becomes a challenge for educators. But for Matt, instead of just pointing out the problem, he's actively trying to meet the students where they're at to adjust his teaching strategies, which is something we also talk quite a bit about in storytelling, is that you need to take into account who your audience is, what are their preferences, how do you adjust the message and stories you want to tell in a way that they can best consume. As a storyteller, you can't always put all the blame on your audience because you have a responsibility to get your message across.
I will go one step further. You can't put any blame on your audience, right? Your audience owes you nothing. They are giving you their time. And you're the one on stage, and your job is to connect with them. Your job is to make it feel like when they leave that hour, that it wasn't a waste of their time or their money, that they got something. It wasn't just them accomplishing the act of going to your class, right? So to do that, you have to understand them. You have to connect with them. You have to go on TikTok and understand how they're consuming. Even if you think it's wrong, even if you think it's bad for them, by understanding why they're doing certain things, understanding how to connect to them, Then you can educate them. Then you can impart the wisdom. Then you can make a joke that lands, right? Because you took the time to understand your audience. And one of the biggest ways you can do that, understand your audience, is another thing we talked to Matt about. You can listen and paraphrase and practice how to listen and paraphrase. And by doing that, you will extend your attention span. By doing that, you will understand your audience better. Even if it's the same story over 2 hours, by taking the time to engage, by listening to the whole story, you can have a rich and different experience. And this is the thing about storytelling. You have to take the time to listen to your audience. And you have to practice doing that. And one of the best ways to do that is through listening and paraphrasing back. So they feel heard and you're making sure you're really getting the message.
Paraphrasing is a great storytelling practice because you're listening to a story and then you're distilling what is the most crucial piece of information from what the other person just said. Not only does it help you practice active listening, which is great for obviously many different things, but it helps you understand how to better consume and understand a story yourself. So definitely encourage everyone to listen more and paraphrase more to everyone you talk to. But this has been another great episode of the Linen Suit and Plastic Tie podcast. We're super thankful for Professor Matt Abrams for coming to the show and sharing his stories and insights. If you like this episode, well, make sure you like this episode and follow us, subscribe where we listen or watch our podcast. Leave us a comment and a review. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, you'll see why we're a 5-star show. It takes one click. It helps us grow the show immensely. So super grateful when you do that. And follow us on Instagram, TikTok at LSPTpod, LinkedIn, Linen Suit and Plastic Tie.
Yeah, I just want to harp on that again. If you're listening on Spotify, listening on Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, we're still fairly new on all those platforms. So we're at a point where literally every single review counts. Every single review helps more people find the show, helps us grow the show, helps us get more guests. So if you're thinking, oh, they don't need my review, we do. So if you're on Spotify, take a second, leave a review. If you're on Apple Podcasts, take 5 seconds, leave a review. The hard part about leaving reviews is listening to the episode, and you've already done that. So leave a review or comment on YouTube, share the episode. It'll just help us make better content for you. But thank you for listening. We really appreciate your time, and we're going to keep being here on this mission to unlock the power of storytelling.